Welcome back to NBC. This is John Boehner. We have a special guest here tonight, the CEO of TVA, Tom Kilgore. He is here to explain what alternative energy is and the effect it is having on the U.S.
Thank you for inviting me today.
Pleasure.
So let's get down to business.
Alright, let's do it.
Thank you much for inviting me today. There are two main categories for electrical production: oil and coal, or conventional and alternative. Conventional and alternative. Conventional ways of producing energy are coal and oil. Those have been around for thousands of years. In coal and oil plants, the non-renewable source is burned very, very hot, and that creates steam when water's put on it. That steam then turns a turbine that creates electricity. Alternative energy is similar, but instead of a non-renewable source, a renewable source like solar, wind, nuclear, or hydro is used to turn the turbine. Alternative energy creates less pollution than conventional and is generally better for the environment. Conventional is most often cheaper though, and also more economically sustaining.
What is some of the history in energy?
It's a very good question. Historical finds show that the Chinese began to use coal as a source of energy in 2000 BC. In 200 BC, early Europeans began to use water harnessing mills to crush grains. In the 1st century, the Chinese first refined oil and used it as an energy source. By the early 1700s, coal had taken over as the predominant source of fuel because of how well it burned. In 1888, the first electricity-producing windmill was built, and by 1950, petroleum became the most used fuel in the U.S. In 1951, the first nuclear power plant was built and started to produce energy. In 2007, IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, found that climate change was real and being caused by humans. In 2008, a National Biofuel Action Plan was revealed. Over $1 billion was budgeted for research into biofuels. In 2009, yeah, that's a whole lot. In 2009, the American Recovery and Reconstruction Act, under President Obama, was passed. It allotted billions of dollars to the Alternative Energy Commission.
Could you explain some of the arguments in favor of alternative energy?
Sure. Alternative energy, unlike oil and coal, does not require drilling deep wells or shipping across wide oceans. Green energy creates jobs and spurs the economy forward in a sector that's never been pushed. With alternative energy, you aren't tangled up in the affairs of other countries and dependent on other countries' exports. The price does not change because of civil war, nor does it change because of fighting on the other side of the countries. Many sources of alternative energy help the environment and keep it clean. Alternative energy is also safer. Many people have died directly or indirectly because of conventional ways of producing energy, but not many at all have died because of alternative.
Okay. So, could you explain some of so what is the most successful source of alternative? We'll be back. And a special reminder, don't forget to pay and feed your pets. Okay, welcome back to NBC. Special guest, Tom Kilgore. We're continuing our interview. So, Ms. Kilgore, it seems that renewable energy could cost a lot. Could you explain some of the costs?
Of course. The average cost to produce 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, about enough to run a 20-watt light bulb for 50 hours. For coal is 4.8 cents. For nuclear, 11.1 cents. For solar, 15 cents. And for wind, 15 cents. That's just the price it costs to make it, not what it may be sold from the company for. However, a 25 kilowatt hour wind turbine can cost upwards of $2 million. Unlike coal plants, though, wind turbines, solar panels, and dams need very little maintenance and do not damage the environment. The annual cost for maintenance of a coal plant greatly exceeds that of an alternative energy source.
So, what is the most successful source of alternative energy in the U.S.?
Currently, hydropower is the most used renewable source in the U.S. At dams around the country, water is being funneled and creating electricity.
Could you explain how the government subsides helps spur alternative energy creation?
Yes, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, a bill passed in 2009, allots $16 billion to the Alternative Energy Commission. Those $16 billion are being used to promote the use of green energy and to also create better and more efficient alternative energies.
Could you explain, or do you think that alternative energy will ever overtake conventional ways of producing it? Did I say that right? Do you think alternative energy will ever overtake conventional ways of producing electricity?
That's a very hard question. The government has created many policies to regulate air and water pollution because of oil and coal plants. With those regulations, conventional ways of producing electricity may seem better and more viable for the future, but very expensive when upgrading older plants. The real question to determine which way comes on top is economics. When an older coal plant is retrofitted to come into compliance with today's regulations, it costs significantly more. At one plant, it costs $16 billion.
Wow. So why do you think alternative energy is now a topic of such heated debate?
It goes back to economics, Mr. Boehner. Many people alternative energy is socially desirable, but not mainstream. People depend on the coal and oil industry. Hundreds of thousands of people are either directly or indirectly involved with that business. If that sector of our economy were to disappear, then many people would lose their jobs. The government is placing more and more restrictions on power companies, where if they don't use alternative energy, then they are fined huge amounts.
Do you think that alternative energy will catch on with the American public?
Personally, I do, Mr. Boehner. The newest fad with the public is going green. I believe that the only way to be completely green is to use alternative energy.
So, after the recent disaster in Japan, what do you think will happen with nuclear energy, a form of alternative energy?
You know, people will be skeptical about nuclear energy. It was a bad disaster, yes. But look at the Kingsland Flash disaster in 2008. Billions of gallons of used coal were dumped in Tennessee. That disaster was terrible for the environment and for the people there. It was one of the worst ever, and it was caused by conventional ways of producing electricity. However, in the history of nuclear energy, only 3 major incidents have ever occurred: Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima Daiichi. I believe that people will see the safety record of nuclear and they will like it better.
Okay, so what is the deal with cap and trade? What is it?
Well, cap and trade is basically a way to regulate the CO2 emissions.
Okay.
The greenhouse gases, the cap is how much they can release, and the trade is that they can trade that amount.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kilgore.
Thank you.
That was Mr. Kilgore. And in other news, massive storms have powdered the Mideast. Tornadoes have claimed the lives of 300. And our report in Nashville reported that it was raining cat and dogs, literally. This is from NBC News. This is John Boehner. Have a good night.